Rafal Pankowski is a professor at the Institute of Sociology of Collegium Civitas in Warsaw, Poland. He is a member of the International Association of Genocide Scholars and a co-founder of the Never Again Association. Professor Pankowski looks at the history of Polish Jews and anti-Semitism leading up to the Holocaust and persisting beyond 1945, even as Poland became a country without a Jewish population.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Dr. Joanna Michlic, and I'm a senior fellow at the London Centre for the Study of Contemporary Antisemitism. It is my great pleasure to introduce our tonight's speaker, Professor Rafal Pankowski from Warsaw, who will be speaking to us about the subject of antisemitism without Jews, the case of contemporary Poland. Professor Rafal Pankowski is a sociologist and political scientist by training, and he works at the Collegium Civitas in Warsaw, where he teaches on antisemitism, xenophobia, and hate speech. He's one of the founders, and he's a current head of a very important organization, Never Again, the East European branch, to monitor anti-Jewish speech, hate speech, racism, and xenophobia. In 2019, Professor Pankowski was awarded the Paul Ehrlich Gunther Schwering Human Rights Award by the Anti-Defamation League. And that award is given to people who fight anti-Semitism. So we have a privilege to talk to a scholar who is also an activist. Professor Pankowski, the floor is yours.
But it became, it became very influential, especially in the field of culture, and in the field of defining what Polish identity means, who belongs to the national community, who doesn't. And I would say that since then, Roman Dmowski's model of Polish identity, including Jews, as well as other ethnic and religious minorities. This model has been with us ever since. And for those of you who have visited Warsaw, you may remember symbolically there is a monument to Roman Dmowski in front of one of the government buildings in Warsaw that was constructed some 15 years ago, and also one of the central sites in Warsaw, the roundabout not far from the central railway station, is also named after Roman Dmowski. And just preparing for our conversation, I thought I could even show you the contemporary Polish passport that has a picture of Roman Dmowski among some other Polish historical figures. But unfortunately, in my passport there is a stamp of Malaysia immigration on his forehead, so I cannot really show it. But okay, this is just one of many examples showing how important Roman Dmowski is in Poland, even now. And let me repeat: he is the founding father of exclusionary nationalism, which has also been very strongly anti-Semitic, and we can therefore call Dmowski a founding father of modern anti-Semitism in Poland. Another phrase that we need to note is the slogan "Polska dla Polaków," Poland for the Polish, where once again the the subtle or not so subtle message is that only those who are quote unquote truly Polish belong to the national community, and this is a slogan that was very prominent in the 1920s, 1930s in Poland, and Jews were among the main targets of that slogan. And it is again not a coincidence that today the big annual march organized by far-right groups in Poland on the 11th of November, the Polish Independence Day, often features the slogan "Poland for the Polish." And it is not a coincidence that this big march is initiated, co-organized by two radical political groups, the National Radical Camp, Obóz Narodowo-Radykalny, and the All Polish Youth, Młodzież Wszechpolska. Both these groups take their names, their symbolism, and of course their ideas directly from the groups that existed under the same names, the same labels in the 1920s and the 1930s. So this element of continuity is, I believe, very important when we talk about modern radical nationalism, and that includes modern anti-Semitism as a part of the political landscape in Poland. So today is the 9th of November. The march will probably be very, very large again this year. Over the years, well, it started as a small event in 2009, but it grew, and eventually it became, I believe, the largest far-right extremist gathering anywhere, bringing together not just Polish groups, but also various neo-fascist, racist, and other extreme right groups from all over Europe and beyond. But of course, it would be wrong to jump directly from the 1920s and the 1930s to the 21st century without noting the most dramatic event in the history of the Jewish community in Poland. Of course, the Holocaust, and I don't want to discuss it in detail. The important debates about the role of collaborators, anti-Jewish violence, also the pogroms committed during and after World War II by the Polish neighbors of the Polish Jews. Of course, Jan Gross and others have written very important books on that. But let me just mention the term introduced by Michael Schaffer, the late Michael Schaffer, deflective negationism, which I think is a good term to employ when describing an important aspect of the legacy or awareness or lack of awareness of what happened to the Polish Jews during World War II. Also, the communist regime in Poland repeatedly sought legitimacy through appealing to ethno-nationalist rhetoric, and of course the communist regime in Poland reached the peak of anti-Semitic rhetoric and policy in 1968 when it conducted its own anti-Semitic campaign that resulted in another wave of emigration of Jews in Poland, and since then the Jewish community in Poland has been very, very tiny indeed. And antisemitism without Jews, the phrase that we used as the title for our conversation today. Well, I believe that was first used, or at least it was popularized by Paul Landwehr, who wrote an important book on anti-Semitism in Central Europe in the early 70s. And of course, it is an exaggeration because Jews exist. The community may be very small, but it exists. Today, there are different estimates. I would say between 10 and 20,000 people. These are the most common estimates for the size of the Jewish community in Poland. And of course, for a country of almost 40 million people, this is a very small minority indeed. But what the phrase, of course, tells us too is the fact that the level of anti-Semitism, which is rooted in prejudice, is high, out of all proportion to the very, very small size of the minority, and it just represents something else. It also represents a more general hostility to democracy and modernity, especially after the changes, the social, political, cultural, and economic changes after 1989. Well, since 2015, we have often heard another phrase which is very similar, namely Islamophobia without Muslims. And I think there are good reasons to use that phrase when talking about Poland as well, because well, the Muslim community in Poland has a long history, but it is also very small. But the level of hostility against Muslims in Poland since especially 2015 has been very high, and that was related first of all to the European refugee crisis, so-called European refugee crisis, that was portrayed in a very negative way in media, in political discourse, and it resulted in a wave of hostility, not just against Muslims, but against various minority groups as well as refugees and migrants. But after 2015, we often heard comments claiming that from now on, Islamophobia replaces anti-Semitism as the most common form of hatred, of hateful discourse. And to be honest, I was never convinced that was the case. At that time, I thought it might be better to formulate that comment in a different way, to frame it a little differently. Islamophobia did not replace anti-Semitism. It supplemented it. And unfortunately, I think I was proved right relatively soon later, namely in 2018, when a big controversy erupted around the so-called memory law, or to be more precise, the legislation on the Institute of National Memory, and of course the most controversial part of that legislation concerned the criminalization of certain statements about the role of Poles in the extermination of Jews during World War II. And you may remember, especially those of you who happened to be in Poland at that time, the controversy escalated very, very quickly. It became an international issue, especially after Israeli and American diplomats criticized the legislation. After several months, the most problematic elements of the law were modified. It was not scrapped completely, contrary to some media reports that you may have read. But I think what was most problematic about what happened then was not so much the actual contents of that particular law, but the discourse that went with it in the public space, including in the biggest media, especially those controlled by the state, and that also included statements made by mainstream politicians, including members of the ruling party. And I believe that in a way, 2018 was the watershed year in terms of mainstreaming anti-Semitism, sometimes in a very crude form. I believe since then it is impossible to claim that anti-Semitism is a marginal issue in Polish politics and society, because what happened in 2018, I believe in some ways is still with us. So the repercussions of this massive wave of anti-Semitism in Polish media and politics, they are not going to disappear anytime soon. Even if today anti-Semitism is not present in media and politics on a daily basis, the repercussions of that wave of anti-Semitic discourse are going to stay with us probably for years to come. But then another important moment was the year 2020. So already during the pandemic, when the presidential campaign focused very much on the issue of the so-called Jewish claims. This is another Polish phrase, roszczenia żydowskie. This is another Polish phrase that entered the mainstream, and the presidential campaign of that year in particular very much focused on this issue, the issue of the imagined threat of the so-called Jewish claims to property in Poland in the context of discussions about Holocaust era property restitution. And well, I would say that was another important moment and another unique moment when anti-Semitism was so central to a political campaign, and those anti-Semitic claims, preferences were instrumentalized in a very spectacular way in the winning campaign that brought victory to President Duda once more. So now the time is flying, but I would like to say something about this very dramatic contemporary context of the war in a neighboring country. The war has had a very big impact on Poland and on Polish society on many levels, in many ways, and of course one of the ways is the presence of millions of refugees from Ukraine in Poland. In a certain sense, that means that very rapidly, over the course of months or even weeks, Poland became a multicultural society once again. Ironically and sadly, because of the circumstances, but Poland is no longer a mono-ethnic society in the same way that it was after 1945, well, this is one of the important aspects of the current situation, because I think even if there is peace in Ukraine tomorrow, I think many of the refugees from Ukraine would stay in Poland anyway for a lot of reasons. And I would say that until now, the most common reaction to this huge refugee movement is solidarity with Ukraine, solidarity with the refugees, which I think is in many ways very impressive, given the scale of the challenge. But there is also a sort of backlash from well, certainly some groups on the extreme right, who are already trying to instigate, to incite hostility, or sometimes even violence against the refugees. And why I'm talking about this in the context of anti-Semitism is because this negative discourse about Ukraine and about Ukrainians and about the refugees is very, very often accompanied by anti-Semitic rhetoric and anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. And well, that is probably not so surprising, given the longevity of anti-Semitic conspiracy theories that we also saw during the pandemic, and of course not just in Poland, but it comes from the same political groups on the far right, such as Konfederacja, so Confederation, which is the far right political party to the right of the current ruling party, Law and Justice, which is represented in the parliament by 11 members of parliament. And I think we also witness the emergence of certain new tropes in anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, especially online. Together with our colleagues from the Media Diversity Institute in London, we participate in the project, the monitoring project under the title "Get the Trolls Out," and we monitor and document such instances. I can mention maybe just one of those anti-Semitic conspiracy theories related directly to the war in Ukraine, which is already significant. It is already surprisingly or not surprisingly popular. It is the idea of Niebiańska Jerozolima, that is the Polish phrase, or heavenly Jerusalem. According to this this anti-Semitic interpretation of the war in Ukraine, the war was planned and implemented by the Jews, of course, with the purpose of sending millions of Ukrainian refugees to Poland, who would subsequently dominate Poland and take power in Poland. And they would also make room in the south of Ukraine for the Jews from Israel, who would subsequently arrive in Ukraine and create another Jewish state. Well, I suppose that sounds like rubbish to all of us, but like I already mentioned, this anti-Semitic trope is already becoming rapidly and widely popular on social media, but also it has been endorsed and supported by certain well-known far-right and anti-Semitic activists, including members of parliament from the party I mentioned, Konfederacja. I expect this kind of discourse to grow in the context of the war and the crisis that is at least partly related to the war in Ukraine. I think there is very broad expectation, and not only in Poland, of major social and economic turmoil, which, as we know very, very well from history, provides a certain window of opportunity for those extreme right groups that weaponize conspiracy theories, and in the context of Poland, those conspiracy theories tend to be anti-Semitic. I hope that my expectation or my anxiety about the new window of opportunity for another wave of anti-Semitic discourse, I hope my expectation is not fulfilled. But I would like to emphasize that our organization, Never Again Association, is already very busy documenting such cases, and we definitely have a lot of work documenting this type of cases every day. So certainly this is something that is already very real. This is something that I am afraid can spread further very soon. There is some fertile ground for that. So there is an urgent need of not just awareness, but also civic intervention. And this is something that we can discuss further, or we can discuss any other issue among the things that I mentioned, and or of course many things that I didn't mention. So I would be very happy to hear your questions or comments or opinions. Once again, thank you very much for inviting me today.
Rafal, thank you very much for this thoughtful talk. I mean, you you cover many aspects of anti-Semitism in Poland today, anti-Jewish tropes in the past, the anti-Jewish traditions and how they unfold today, and the expansions of these traditions. So I would like to open the floor for discussions, and given the fact that this talk is on Zoom, you can either write your question or comments in the chat, or you can raise the hand, and I will try to make sure that I will call you, see you and call your name. We are on 2 pages, so at present I see one raised hand. I don't know the name of the person, but I'm actually will try to unmute the person. The gentleman.
I can't see anyone with a raised hand, sorry.
Okay. No.
Yeah,
You just unmuted me. Yes, thank you. So
I saw you quite
yes,
quickly.
yes, you did. You did. Thank you very much. So Professor Pankowski, thank you for your very interesting presentation. My name is Henrik Baran, by the way. I have 2 quick questions. The first one, to what extent the current anti-Semitic discourse connected to the anti-German discourse, which is playing such a major role in current Polish political life? And the second one, I had not heard about the concept of the heavenly Jerusalem connected with Ukraine, and I'm wondering, is it in some way connected to the term Niebiesnaya Sotnia, which of course was applied to those who perished in the revolution in Kiev? Any comments would be appreciated. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I think both these questions are interesting. Let me start from the second one, because that is maybe easier for me. My honest answer is I'm not sure. I don't really know for sure. I've been trying to find more information about the genesis of this conspiracy theory, and of course it sort of uses the long history of Jewish presence in Ukraine, but the actual origin of the phrase is still a little bit unclear. I had a very interesting conversation about that with Konstanty Gebert, who is known to many of you, and I think we need to do more research on that, and maybe we will be able to locate the precise origin of this conspiracy theory, just the way we can more or less locate the origin of the protocols of the Elders of Zion. But I think that would take some time, and maybe that's not even the most important thing. What I think is very important now is to document the spread of this theory at the same time as trying to find out its specific source. The other question is complex. Well, first of all, the movement of Roman Dmowski, I already talked about, was simultaneously anti-Jewish and anti-German. So once again, there is a long history, there is a long tradition of the nationalist movement in Poland being both anti-Semitic and anti-German. Also, the communist period offers example of discourse that was simultaneously anti-Israeli and anti-German or anti-West German, if you like, which I think is very often recycled in Poland today, like you said, and I completely agree with you that some of the some of the tropes that we see in Poland today are simultaneously anti-German and anti-Semitic, alluding to a supposed collusion between Jews and Germans against Poland on issues of history, on issues such as reparations or property restitution, and so on. So I would say yes. I would say yes. Quite often those discursive tropes go together, and perhaps it is a peculiar aspect of the or one of the peculiar aspects of anti-Semitic discourse in Poland today.
Thank you, Rafal, for answering those questions. Since I don't see any other questions, I have a couple of questions for you, and I will be asking you these questions not only in the capacity of the host, the chair of this meeting, but also a scholar of anti-Semitism in Poland. And I would like to start with the issue of radical political parties. As we know, they grow and spread. There is proliferations of variety of movements. They split up. And there is a new situation in Poland currently. In the past, let's say at the beginning of the post-communist period, being a member of a radical extreme right-wing party was something that you would not necessarily advertise in society as such. However, today, looking at these demonstrations that you have talked about, and we are about to witness, to see another radical right-wing demonstrations all over Poland, the main ones in Warsaw, but they are taking place in other cities. And in these radical demonstrations, ordinary members of society take part, including young families with children. There is a lot of violence associated with these demonstrations. And this is what actually bothers me. I have written about this because there is that performance of power, anti-Jewish hate covered or overt very often in the slogans. And you have very young people. You also have middle class individuals. You also have people in their 60s and 70s participating in those events. How do you see it? Is it something broken in terms of a code? What is right and what is wrong in Polish society, given that situation?
Mm-hmm. No, I certainly agree with you. The social norm has shifted. I think there is no doubt about that. The social norm has shifted. The distinction between political extremism and the political mainstream has been blurred. That is very true. It didn't happen overnight. Well, many people, for reasons that I understand points to the year 2015. I also mentioned that important year, but I think it doesn't mean that everything changed. That everything changed in 2015. It was a longer process. I would say that was a longer process of erosion of certain norms and values of the political culture, the democratic political culture that existed before. And once again, of course, we know this is not just a Polish phenomenon, but I think Poland is a good example of that. It is a good example of that, which is important for many reasons, but one of the good reasons to look at Poland as an important case is the fact that Poland used to be, Poland was often presented as a model of successful democratic transformation, and again, not without not without good reasons. But I think the Polish case also shows that the democratic culture and the progress of democratic transformation cannot be taken for granted. It is not a one-way street. Democratization is not a one-way street. And yes, I think in many ways the issue of anti-Semitism is a part of that, and also the more broader issue of extreme nationalism or hatred in politics. But I think well, okay. What is maybe what is important to note is also the very common assumption that I think was very widespread on the part of what we can call the liberal elite in the 1990s about democratization being a one-way street. And I think there was also a very common assumption about anti-Semitism being a kind of leftover from the past, being something that mostly concerned people who may have been, born and raised before World War II and socialized in a certain way and with a certain baggage of prejudice. Well, those people sooner or later will disappear, and anti-Semitism would disappear with them. I think also this assumption included the idea that young people who would be born and raised in a new democratic society, they would automatically be more progressive, more open-minded, more tolerant than the generation of their parents and grandparents. And I think already in the 90s this assumption was wrong. And already in the 90s, when we started the Never Again Association, we challenged that assumption, because already then we saw many things on also on the level of the younger generation that were contrary to that problematic assumption. So we saw the emergence of an anti-Semitic culture in the football stadium. We saw the emergence of extreme right political groups active among the younger generation, and so on. So once again, I would repeat, I agree with you. A lot has changed, but that was a process that took years. But of course, in the last years, we see the intensification of the phenomenon. And yes, once again, this big march in Warsaw, in particular, on the 11th of November, is a good example. Is a good example of that. It includes some of those extreme right groups and activists, but it also includes other people who apparently see nothing wrong with bringing their kids to a demonstration organized by extremists, which I think is very worrying in itself.
Right.
Absolutely. So I think this really this really challenging year 2018 that I mentioned, which was the year of 100 years of Polish independence, the year when the wave of anti-Semitism unfortunately occurred in the first half of year. But I think it was also a very bad moment when the march in November was joined by the President of Poland, which I would say symbolically legitimized even further the rise of nationalist extremism in the country. Thank you.
Before I ask you my second question, I have a question for you from Leon Edelman, who is asking the following. What role does the Catholic Church play in spreading anti-Semitism in Poland?
I'm not surprised by this question. I think it is a very legitimate question, and I would be surprised if it didn't appear in our discussion. Well, I already alluded to the phrase Polak Catholic, Polish Catholic, which is one of the most dominant interpretations of what it means to be Polish. But I would stress again, I think in this context, Catholic is not so much an indicator of a certain belief, but it is a marker of ethnicity. When it comes to the church, and of course, there is a long history of anti-Semitism in the Catholic Church, but I think in the 1990s in Poland, there were many positive initiatives from the church or within the church on Christian-Jewish dialogue or Catholic-Jewish relations. And I think at that time we could still debate which of the movements, groups, initiatives within the Catholic Church in Poland, which one is more representative? Would it be, for example, Tygodnik Powszechny, a very respected intellectual publication with a very positive attitude to all things Jewish? Or would it be Radio Maria, which is the opposite of Tygodnik Powszechny, which is not just a radio station, but it is a sort of social movement, which is Catholic as well as xenophobic and often anti-Semitic. And I would say, unfortunately, today it is more and more clear to me that Radio Maria has won this debate within the Catholic Church in Poland, and I think especially since the death of John Paul II, the sort of xenophobic wing of the Catholic Church in Poland has been gaining more and more influence. Well, you could say the church as a whole has been shrinking in terms of its influence in Polish society, especially among young people. But in terms of the sort of power struggle within the church in Poland, I would say that the xenophobic wing is definitely stronger, and that often means expressions of anti-Semitism. And what has happened to the Catholic University of Lublin, I think, is one big example of that. The university that for decades could be proud of its academic standing as well as a certain spirit of tolerance, today is one of the hotbeds of far right as well as anti-Semitic activity. And I can give specific examples of the way that the Catholic University of Lublin, for example, has publicly officially legitimized blood libel, which we thought was thing of the past in the Catholic Church in the 20th century. So I would say my assessment of the position of the Catholic Church in Poland vis-a-vis anti-Semitism is not a very positive one. Of course, we could still find good people within the church who have goodwill when it comes to confronting anti-Semitism, but I'm afraid they may not have the kind of standing that they deserve.
Legitimization of the blood libel, I think, is one of the most disturbing phenomena. And of course, we are talking also about education. And I think one of the lectures that talk about blood libel as a historical fact was available for a very long time on a YouTube run by the Catholic University in Lublin. But I have another question on another topic, different topic. How would you assess the role of anti-Zionism in Poland's politics amongst political parties? That's a question from Laura Löw.
Mm-hmm. Well, of course, the anti-Semitic campaign of 1968 is also referred to as the anti-Zionist campaign, but if we, because it was sort of expressed through anti-Zionist language. But if we talk about more recent period, I think from time to time we heard that, okay, the Polish right may be often anti-Semitic, but at least they support Israel in the field of international relations. I think there was a certain cynical assessment of those two levels of analysis, and I think that really changed in 2018 when the wave of anti-Semitism, the anti-Semitic statements related to Polish history and the history of World War II and the Holocaust, that went together with a wave of very aggressive and very negative language about Israel. So I think now I would say that this distinction is no longer valid. The distinction between expressions of anti-Semitism for the domestic market as somehow offset by the support for the state of Israel on the international level, I think that no longer applies as a very sort of clear-cut distinction. And I think since 2018, the hostility against Israel as such has also been very often expressed in very spectacular ways in Polish media and politics, including the media owned by the state and including members of the ruling party.
Thank you, Rafał, for this. Actually, the anti-Zionist, anti-Israeli rhetoric was present at the commemorations of the Jedwabne event 2 years ago and 3 years ago in Jedwabne, and this right-wing organizations went there to accuse those who wanted to commemorate the Jewish victims of the Jedwabne pogrom of representing people who have inflicted much more harm to other people than the Poles did to the Jews. And this brings me to another question that I actually wanted to ask you. Is you have mentioned the Jedwabne debate, you have mentioned the discourse, and what we see here with the discourse about Jedwabne and the new wave of press, books, articles questioning the findings of Jan Gross and others. What we see in this material is underlying anti-Jewish propaganda. And once again, the Jews are the ones who have harmed the Poles, and in the fact that they are actually producing now works that question the myth of the noble Poland, and solely noble Poland, the Poland of victims and heroes only, confirms the fact that the Jews are the key enemies of Poland. And of course, this also goes beyond that and spreads to the utilization of secondary literature about the Holocaust from the West, and utilizing this literature, authors such as key scholars of the Holocaust, David Engels and others, to claim actually that the Jews inflicted upon themselves discrimination and persecutions in the ghettos. Eva Kurek, I think, is one of the key examples of that propaganda. So I would like to hear from you some of your thoughts on this very troubling topic, because deals with the memorializations of the Holocaust and with the creation of anti-memorialization of the Holocaust filled with anti-Semitic tropes at the moment.
Mm-hmm. I think this term anti-memorialization is a very interesting one, and very relevant. I think we could also call it, sometimes we can call it pseudo-memorialization, or manipulative memorialization, which is all about instrumentalizing history. And Poland is one of the rare countries where history can be front page news. Historical debates are still very important in Poland, in Polish politics, in Polish society, well, for a lot of reasons that go beyond the history of anti-Semitism. But it is also one of the important topics. I think in this context, it is very difficult to overestimate the role of one institution in particular, namely IPN, the Institute of National Memory. With a lot of funding, to be sure, and with a lot of power and a lot of influence on different levels of Polish government administration and society, and that includes the educational system and many other things. And unfortunately, this institution that could be a very positive actor when it comes to dealing with the past, when it comes to dealing with commemoration in a dignified and constructive way. Well, this very institution in the last years has become a tool of the far right nationalist agenda of of instrumentalized history. And yes, we can give a long list of examples of problems of manipulating the history of the Holocaust, the stories of the righteous, the facts of related to well, for example, the Jewish police in the ghetto, and so on and so on. All those elements combined often amount to portraying Jews and the victims of the Holocaust in the bad light, and the ethnic Poles in a good light. Well, there are also well-known cases of far-right, of known far-right extremists being nominated to high-level position within the Institute of National Memory. I would say it's also not a coincidence that, for example, a long-time head of publishing, of the publishing part of the institute, is has a record of publishing Holocaust revisionist material, including David Irving's books in the Polish translation. So I think this is one of the most important, not the only one, but one of the most important fronts in the well, in what we can call struggle against anti-Semitism in Poland. It is the front of history and memory, and in this context, the Institute of National Memory is one of the most problematic institutions, one of the most problematic actors. Not the only one. There are also big discussions around the Pilecki Institute and other similar institutions sponsored by the government. But certainly the Institute of National Memory is the most powerful one.
Rafał, I cannot agree with you more. Just to explain to some of our listeners, the institute, Pilecki Institute, that you just mentioned, is an offspring of the Institute of National Memory, set up in 2017, and it not only works in Poland, within the country, but it has its branches in different countries, in different capitals all over Europe. And the Berlin branch, for example, is one of the most active one. But going back to the questions about anti-Zionist rhetoric in current politics, I have a follow-up questions by Henrik Baron. He's asking you, does the Polish government continue to support Israel in the UN?
Well, I'm sure this remark is correct in the sense that I'm sure there are votes in the UN where the Polish government still votes in favor of Israel, but I think that can no longer be taken for granted the way I think it was often taken for granted until 2018. So since then, for sure, the interstate relations have been very strained and very, very tense. It is just not the same. It is not the way the relationship was. Also between between the Polish leaders and the Israeli leaders. And of course, there is another there is another player here, which is the US, and the Polish right has been very very strongly linked politically to the Trump camp. But as we all know, the Trump period in the US has also meant in many cases well, instrumentalization of of the Jewish community and the issues in the Middle East that we don't really need to discuss, that we don't need to discuss here, but we also know that there have been expressions of anti-Semitism on the right in the US that also have been considered a form of encouragement for or a form of legitimizing anti-Semitism more globally and also in Poland. But of course, this is a slightly different topic, not not our main topic for today, I understand.
Thank you. I think the latest news from the United States might be that Donald Trump be losing advocates. But I want to finish on another note. You have mentioned the Russian war against Ukrainians and the rise of new anti-Semitic tropes as a result of having a large Ukrainian group of refugees in Poland. We know that 7.5 million Ukrainians enter Poland. I think 25% of that number, I think, has been living in Poland since the outbreak of the war. And in my view, these new tropes are old one in the new battles because they basically reinforce the myth of the Jew as Poland's threatening other on an international scale, as well as on a global international scale. And here the aspect of international scale is being brought into to explain that the Jews are in fact behind this war. Yes, and as a result, it is us, the Poles, who suffer because the Ukrainians are taking our jobs, etc., taking our space, and Ukrainian children are taking space in Polish schools. But in some ways, this is still the old structure, the old frame or the matrix of the right-wing anti-Semitism that makes the Jews in the center of all the disasters that befalls Poland. Do you see that this way?
Well, thank you. That is, I think this is a very interesting comment, and obviously I agree with you. I would maybe add one more aspect that is related. I believe. So one of the big challenges of one of many big challenges of the refugee situation in Poland today is the challenge of diversity. And of course, I think I already mentioned it. It's never been true that Poland was 100% ethnic Polish after 1945, but it was almost. Historically, Poland, of course, used to be one of the most diverse societies in the whole of Europe. But after 1945, it was one of the most monocultural, monoethnic societies in the whole of Europe. So this issue of diversity and homogeneity is, or the choice, if you like, the dilemma between diversity and homogeneity, the tension is a serious one. And well, frankly speaking, most Polish people have very little experience of living in a diverse, multicultural society, and the very the very moment of confrontation with diversity brings challenges. and of course, historically, as we know, the other in Polish culture has often or usually been the Jew. Now it may be the Ukrainian, but it may be the Ukrainian refugee, but the conflation of the Jew and the refugee and the Ukrainian is, I think, in some ways, is a reaction to the challenge of diversity. And I think this is in some ways where those conspiracy theories come from. They come from the shock of the war, the shock of being confronted with millions of refugees, but also this is one way of making sense of reality, which is very difficult to make sense of. And again, I guess this is nothing new, because historically anti-Semitic conspiracy theory has been a way of making sense of reality that was difficult to understand, that was complex, that was challenging. And I think in a way this is a similar challenge, but on a huge scale. And of course, under very dramatic and tragic circumstances.
Thank you for this. Actually, this shows us that in many ways, the anti-Semitic tropes today have the same non-rational base, and fear is one of the driving forces behind the rise of anti-Semitism and incorporation of this anti-Semitic myths, old anti-Semitic myths, into the explanations of current problems that Poles have to deal with. I don't see any other questions, so I would like to thank you, Rafal, for this thoughtful lecture on troubling intellectually and morally topic. I'm sure that we'll be meeting you at different capacity soon. But before we end this Zoom, I would like to remind our audience that our seminar series is run in collaboration with the Center for the Study of Contemporary Antisemitism and Indiana University. And our next lecture will be given on 13 November, very soon. And our speaker on that day will be Franziska Haug, who will be talking on a different subject, but very topical one, to the functions of anti-Semitism in queer feminist discourse. So we all look forward to seeing you at this talk and future talks, and we look forward to hosting, Rafal, you at another event. Once again, thank you for all your reflections and fascinating discussion.
That is my pleasure. Thank you very much.